Welcome to General Conference Conversations, where we have conversations about General Conference. I'm your host, Kaylin, and I'm super excited to be here with you studying the words of Christ's chosen leaders. I hope you enjoy. Hello. Welcome back to another episode of General Conference Conversations. We are at the end of Saturday morning session. So we're done with our first session, which is so crazy to me that we're already, 8 episodes in. That's 4 weeks. So yeah, it's about a month. Anyway, so we're about a fifth of the way through, which is also pretty crazy, but I'm excited because today's talk is President Nelson, and I love, obviously he's the prophet, so I love hearing him speak, but I also just love hearing President Nelson speak. There's just a lot of love in the way that he speaks and the way that he talks to us, that just makes me really happy. So as usual, I encourage you to listen to and or read the talk before you come and listen to me talk about it. It's probably gonna be a short one. I know I said that the last couple of episodes, and they've all been about the normal length. I've gone back through and I've looked at them like, oh, it's not really shorter than normal, but President Nelson's talk is shorter than normal. It's only 5 minutes and 46 seconds. So this one actually is probably going to be a little bit shorter just because the talk is shorter. But and it's also kind of just an amalgamation, since it is kind of his welcome to conference, end of first session talk. It's kind of a hodgepodge of things. And so he kind of talks about, he kind of recaps the last 6 months, what things that have happened, about FSLA conferences and temples. And he says this quote, which I adore. With the dedication of each new temple, additional godly power comes into the world to strengthen us and counteracts the intensifying efforts of the adversary. And it's one sentence, it's so small, and President Nelson talks about temples all the time, right? But as I've said before, there are some things that just really stick in my brain, and I just really love that reminder and that promise as well, as kind of prophetic vision of, well, the more the temples are built, the more influence God has in the world, and the less influence Satan has in the world. That as we have more houses of the Lord's going to be here more, which, his presence is here more, which I just love. So that's actually my first question is, how have you felt more godly power come into your life when you include temple and family history work? I know not everybody can make it to the temple super often. Sometimes it's just once or twice a year. Sometimes it's every 10 years. I grew up in Colorado till I was 10, and we were an hour and a half from the temple in Denver. And then we moved out to Illinois, and we were 2.5 hours from our temple. And so often it was just the one, yearly youth baptismal trip. And then as a missionary, we lived super close, but we weren't able to go every single week. We went every transfer, which was really a big deal. I know a lot of missionaries didn't get that opportunity. And and then ever since, well, no, that's not true. I moved back to where I went on my mission, and so I was 20 minutes from the temple. And then for about 7 months after my husband and I got married, we lived 5 hours from a temple, and now we live 5 minutes from a temple. So I have kind of been all across the board on how far I've lived from a temple and how often I've been able to go and participate in temple work. But something that I noticed, well, and then obviously during the pandemic, I didn't go, even as a missionary, because all the temples were closed. And one of the things that we did, some of the guidance the church sent out, was to do online service projects. I had no idea what that meant, and I don't think anybody else really knew what that meant, but it's fine. So we actually had one of our members brought us, obviously we were in quarantine at the church building, but we had a member bring us her laptop, and we did indexing. And then on our phones, we could do a little bit of like family history work on the family tree app. So we could do like tasks and like getting rid of duplicates and like things like that. And we could just read about our family, like going back and looking at memories and where they're from and all of that jazz. And I'm not great at doing that. I'm still not great at doing family history consistently. I was on the family history and temple family history committee for a while in my YSA ward, and even then I was terrible at doing it. But I know that when I do family history work, I get a lot of the same feelings as I do when I'm in the temple. It's different, obviously, because I'm not in the temple, but they're very similar. Like, it's a very similar spirit, which makes sense because you're preparing people to go to the temple. And I know for me, I definitely feel more godly power come into my life when I go to temple. And even though I live 5 minutes away, I'm still terrible at going to the temple, but I try to make a point of at least walking to the temple as often as I can, and at least being on the grounds. I love being on the temple grounds, even if I can't go inside or don't have enough time to go inside, or I just, whatever it may be, I'm working through my own stuff. At least going and sitting on the grounds or walking around or something, taking pictures. It's a place that brings a lot of godly power into my life. So how do you, because obviously he says as the dedication of each new temple, godly power into the world, but how has godly power come into your life? How have you seen that in your life, the influence of the temple, and also doing family history work, things like that? His next paragraph is about abuse, because he says it counteracts the intensifying efforts of the adversary, right? And he says abuse constitutes the influence of the adversary. It's a grievous sin. And then he says, sorry, my computer's freaking out. Let me be perfectly clear. Any kind of abuse of women, children, or anyone is an abomination to the Lord. He grieves, and I grieve whenever anyone is harmed. He mourns, and we all mourn for each person who has fallen victim to abuse of any kind. Those who perpetuate these hideous acts are not only accountable to the laws of man, but will also face the wrath of Almighty God. And I appreciated this, and so a few months ago, I think it was like 2 months, maybe a month or 2 months before conference, a story broke on the Associated Press about an abuse case that was not handled well by the church. specifically by a bishop, and the hotline that bishops have to deal with abuse cases. And it was a really big deal, at least on like Instagram and things like that. And so I appreciated him saying that specifically and very forcefully talking about abuse and how it is not right. It is not. It is an abomination that they will face the wrath of God. So I really appreciated him talking about that. And then he also points out there's a whole section on the church website about abuse for teachers and people in callings, presidencies who think they might be witnessing abuse or know somebody who is experiencing abuse in their ward, for somebody who might be experiencing abuse at home. There's helps and aids and articles and things like that. There's also what's it called now? The children and youth training. I don't remember exactly what the title is, but if you're called to a calling in your ward where you work with the children or youth, you have to take it. I think you have to take it, honestly, it's like every 2 years or something like that. Like you have to update it continually. So I took it at the beginning of this year because I was a youth Sunday school teacher, and it's all about how to spot abuse and also to prevent the possibility of abuse happening between yourself and like a child, fellow teachers, other students, things like that, which I know is also a really big deal when that came out a few years ago. And then he talks about truth, and he says, "Dear brothers and sisters, God is the source of all truth. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints embraces all truth that God conveys to his children, whether learned in a scientific laboratory or received by direct revelation from him." And that's obvious. That's such a President Nelson thing to say, I think. Being a doctor and being a prophet. I mean, we've seen that. We've witnessed that with the COVID pandemic, and everything that he talks about, the way that he bears his testimony. He doesn't do it so much anymore, but I know as an apostle, he talked a lot about, I mean, he does now too, obviously. He talks about being a heart surgeon, but I know of a lot of his talks that talk about the physical. He's a very scientific man. He is a doctor, and using those analogies to understand the world and to understand gospel concepts. And I also just love I'm grateful for him talking about that like there's a lot of sources for truth, but God is the one that's above all, and he wants to tell us things, and he wants to give us truths, and that leads into his kind of last quote of his talk. He says, "From this pulpit today and tomorrow, you will continue to hear truth. Please make notes of things that catch your attention and those that come into your mind and stay in your heart. Prayerfully ask the Lord to confirm that what you have heard is true." And there's a couple things I wanted to point out. Well, all of it, obviously that's why I wrote it, but I appreciated him talking about the things that catch your attention, those that come into your mind and stay in your heart. And the reason I appreciate that caught my mind is often, and I've talked about this before, and I'm going to say it again, often we talk about the Spirit as a very in a very specific way. as a warm feeling, as comfort, as emotion, and often it is. When I feel the Spirit, I get very emotional, but that's not always how it happens. There's also an intellectual thing that happens, and I've told this story I think 3 times now on this, but it's part of my point, so bear with me. When I was a missionary, we did Book of Mormon reads for the YSA ward, and we'd all just get together and we'd pick up a chapter and we'd read verse by verse and we'd talk about it. And when COVID hit, we started doing it over Zoom, which was kind of rough, but it actually kind of took off. It actually ended up being really good. But there was one night we did Alma 7, which is one of my favorite chapters in the Book of Mormon. And I had my journal Book of Mormon out and I was taking notes, and it was such a fantastic discussion. Like, we were having so many people like raise their hands and pipe up and say things. I don't even think we made it through the whole chapter in our allotted, hour, because we were just having so many discussions. And I remember looking over at my companion and she's like, man, I feel the spirit is so strong right now. And she was like on the verge of tears. And I sat there for a second and I was like, I don't feel it. And it kind of like, it took me by surprise, because I was like, obviously the Spirit is here. I know the Spirit is here, but I don't feel choked up. I don't feel like, it's not a feeling, it's not an emotion. And I looked down at my scriptures and I saw all of the notes that I had taken, and there were so many notes, and there were so many underlines and like arrows with really frantic notes taking, and I had flipped to other places in my Book of Mormon to make notes and connections and like write down different verses and how they connected and like all of this stuff. And I was in the Spirit at that point. I was like, oh, the Spirit is speaking to me. And it was like, it's not always a spirit. I'm not always a feeling. I'm speaking to you through your thoughts and through your mind and through connections, and epiphanies and things like that. And so I liked that he talked about both mind and heart, because I think often we talk about the heart a lot. We kind of focus on the heart, and this, the Lord is speaking to my heart, the Lord is speaking to my soul. That we sometimes forget about the many times that prophets have said, the words came into my mind, or the thought came into my mind. And that's different for everybody. You might not ever have an experience where it's a mind thing. Maybe it's always a heart thing for you, and that's totally fair. I've had both, and that's just been my experience. But I like hearing prophets talk about, and prophets and apostles and anybody talking in conference, talking about the way that they feel the Spirit and how different it is for all of them. There's now I'm not going to be able to think of it. There's a scripture that talks about that, God talks to people through their own understanding, through the language that they understand. And I know that I've read many quotes about, he talks to the songwriter in music, he talks to the scientist in science. That's like I was just saying with President Nelson. That's how he's made connections and how he's understood gospel concepts, is through the literal physical heart, like the literal blood pumping in his veins, and learning about the human body. He's come to understand truths about the universe and truths about God. I work through words. I'm a writer. And there's been many times that I've been writing and God reveals something to me, or I'm reading and God reveals something to me through something that might not have anything to do with the church whatsoever. I'm reading a random fiction book and there's a line and God says, that's truth. And the Spirit just is like, dink, there, that one, that's true. And so anyway, I just really loved that, and I love that he's like, and thoughts that catch your attention. I'm really good at taking notes with things that catch my attention that are said to me in conference, and not always things that like run through my brain. during conference, and I actually had, I think this is the first time I've done this since I was like a primary kid. I had physical notes that somebody had made, and it had sections, and then also a notes page, but sections of like things that stood out to me or things to look up later, like kind of little prompts, which helped me actually think about it and pay attention, because I was like, oh, I actually want to like write things down in these, and so I'm gonna kind of try to remember that and try to think about things that come to my mind, not just like phrases that jump out at me and themes of talks, but things that might not have anything to do with what's actually being said. And so yeah, so I just love that, and that's obviously a massive invitation from our prophet. And so that's my second question, is what promptings have you received so far as you've studied either with me on this or on your own as you've gone through, maybe you're not going through an order and you're reading reading the talks out of order, but what promptings have you received, and if you have notes, if you took notes, what promptings did you receive as you sat and listened? Maybe now's a good chance to go back and look at the notes that you took as you were actually watching the thoughts that caught your attention and that entered your mind and stayed in your heart. So yeah, what promptings have you received so far? And then he has one couple more sentences at the end of his talk. His prayer was that this conference will provide a spiritual feast, which I also love that phrasing. There'll be a spiritual feast for us. So yes, those two questions were, how have you felt godly power come into your life as you participate in temple ordinances, temple work, and family history work as well? And then what promptings have you received so far, or what promptings did you have as you were listening that really stood out to you? And the only further reading I had for this one, if you wanted to, was the section in the gospel or on the church website about abuse. It's abuse.churchofjesuschrist.org. If you're interested in reading any of that further, I think it's really interesting. I haven't been on there in a while, so I'm sure that they've added things, but I think it's good to understand it, just to understand what to look for, even if you don't think anybody around you. But it's good information to have and to know what resources the church has as well. Yeah, I'm excited to continue the next session next week, and to explore and discuss more talks with you. So thank you so much for listening to and or watching this episode of General Conference Conversations. Be sure to like and follow and share us on Facebook and Instagram. And if you like the show, please subscribe or leave a review and tell your friends and family. Also, a quick reminder that there is a physical study guide to go along with these videos. You can find that link in the description. Until next time.